Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome everybody to the first capital budget subcommittee hearing. Welcome my colleagues, in particular the Vice Chair, Corey McCrae. I know that an impending snowstorm is coming, so we're going to try to be as diligent and time-sensitive as possible. There will be people calling in, but I'm going to try to take those that are in person as quick as possible. So first, we're going to start with a capital budget fiscal analysis by the indispensable Matthew Klein, who said he's going to keep this to 30 seconds. No, I'm teasing, Matt. But please, the floor is yours, sir, and appreciate all. I know I tease, but I know a lot of work went into this, and this subcommittee appreciates it.
And secondly, 30 seconds, yeah. But I will try to keep it as brief as I can, given the time constraints and the weather forecast. So we'll start on page 1. So this is try to give you a sense of what the fiscal 26 proposed budget is compared to 25, as well as compared to what was planned for 26 in last year's CIP. You can see the budget's $3,068 million. This compares pretty favorably to fiscal 2025. It's about $293 million more, but if you look at the fund sources, you'll notice that the state fund sources, the bond premiums, the GO bond funds, and the general funds, and then the recycled funds are almost exactly on par with fiscal 2025. The major differences are in the numbers for the Built to Learn program. Roughly about $1.7 billion will be authorized in debt for that program, in addition to the lottery revenues that are going into the fund for the Prince George's County P3, which is why it's not more in debt for that. And so there's a variation in essentially the accounting for the issuance stream for that. And the federal funds are down demonstrably from last year. This is principally because the state's broadband initiative, which has been heavily funded with federal funds through the IIJ program and through ARPA, expired in fiscal 2025. So there's no more funding in fiscal 2026 for that. And something you'll learn a little bit later, which is the budget no longer includes federal funds for the new veterans home in Sykesville, which we'll say it's on hold, but it's precariously on hold at this point. Page 2 is the same breakdown. This just gives it into the uses that we typically provide this in. You can see that, again, that the budget primarily is the same as last year, but it is more than what was proposed in the CIP by about $246 million overall. And then looking at the uses, education, higher education, the environment, and housing are the typical places where most of the funds are provided in the budget. That makes up the largest share of the budget. One thing to note is local projects. We typically do not we do not earmark in the CIP out-year estimates for local projects. Since the last few years, the fiscal situation looked better than it did beginning really last year, and the state has provided a lot of funding for local projects, about $430 million in fiscal 2025, but you can see only about 9.7 was programmed in the CIP. So that is both the difference between 2025, because it's about $232 million proposed for 2026, but demonstrably different than what was planned in the CIP, again, because we do not plan for those traditionally. On page 3, this just gives you a summary of the fiscal 26 budget compared to the last 5 years. And you can see the expansion of the capital program took place really beginning in fiscal 2022, when it looked like the state's fiscal situation looked better. And it continued through 23 and 24, and to some extent in fiscal 2025. But fiscal 2026 begins to more normalize the capital program, still significantly more than the 2021 budget, a little bit more on par with fiscal 2022. And if you track the state dollars, it pretty much tracks along the same line. If you're looking at the general funds, the bond premiums, and the GO bond funds, the first 3 bars in each of those bar sections, you'll see that it escalates in slightly in 22, and then demonstrably in 23 and 24. So I'm going to turn to page 4 and begin sort of just a little section of observations in the budget. And first, as you know, from the regular fiscal briefing, the big fiscal briefing, that the GO bond authorization level is set at the Spending Affordability Committee level of 1.75. Just taking you back a little bit, before last session, the CIP had programmed about $1.25 billion of GO and had programmed a significant amount of general funds in the 5-year CIP. When the fiscal situation began to look different in the fall of 2023, the Spending Affordability Committee adopted a different proposal, which was to increase the bond authorization level by about $500 million a year every year in the plan, and remove planned proposed expenditures of general funds so that those would be available to support the state's operating budget. And you can see on page 4 that this is affordable within the affordability limits that are established. This particular affordability limit is that the state needs to limit its debt service to 8% of revenue. And you can see here that even going all the way out into 2030 with all of the increases, we're still just slightly above 6%. You can also see here, though, the bars, that the debt service is obviously increasing as beginning in the fiscal 2025, the state began authorizing that additional $500 million of debt above what had been programmed in the prior years. So you can see debt service is rising commensurate with the GO bond funds that are being authorized above what was programmed just a couple years ago. Turn to page 5, a few other observations. And I'd be remiss if I just passed over the GO bond, the debt service side of this, without talking to the committees a bit about the rather substantial amount of debt that has been authorized mostly through the Stadium Authority, backed by lottery, which we do not include as state debt. So there's been, and most of the expansion in the capital program really has been for projects that are being funded by lottery. Of the 4.5 billion, of the 5.5 billion of this is counted as non-state debt in the accounting by the rating agencies. And Appendix 1 on page 27 gives you a perspective of where the rating agencies look at where the state is on the debt outstanding to personal income. We're still within the limits. However, when you account for all of the additional debt that we do not count, but the rating agencies count, that's something to keep track of, particularly with respect to the lottery and coverage ratios and how those funds have been used over the years. It's a declining source of funds to fund projects, given its use and the coverage ratios and what the rating agencies are saying to the state when they're looking at our debt and rating us each year. There's also a component of bond premiums. This is a significant component of this year's budget. I think most of you know, over the years, the state has used bond premiums to support the capital program. The last couple of years, the Treasurer's Office has chosen to use most of that for debt service. When these premiums are realized, they go into the annuity bond fund, and then they help support debt service. The budget this year does, however, in order to provide for some of the expansion that the administration is looking for, does provide $140 million of bond premiums in fiscal 26, plus another $5 million as a deficiency for fiscal 2025. So that's $145 million of bond premiums. And the table in the middle of page 5 gives you a perspective of where those are being drawn from the bond sale that took place last June, and then a prospectus on the premiums that we expect to get from the bond sale that'll take place this June. As I already said earlier, there's a very limited use of general funds in the capital program. Over the last couple of years, there is roughly 40.1 million of general funds proposed for fiscal 2026, and the governor includes about 34.8 million of deficiencies for fiscal 2025. So taken collectively, you've got about $75 million of general funds overall that are proposed in the overall budget for the 2025 session. Now, some of this is being used to replace inadvertent reversions at the closeout of fiscal 2024, several items that were funded with PAYGO in 2022 and 23 2023 were inadvertently reverted. So you can see from the table on page 6, roughly about 17.8 of this is in the form of deficiencies for inadvertent reversions. In the fiscal 26 column, looking down at the bottom, a significant number of the 40 million proposed for fiscal 2026 is to support strategic governor's initiatives. I think the committee just heard the hearing on the dedicated purpose account, where most of these funds, or some of these funds, are placed. $7.5 million for downtown hotel and another $2 million for Hopkins project or in the DPA, and the governor has $25 million of strategic initiatives in the Department of General Services budget. Noteworthy, $15 million for Trade Point Atlantic is also a $15 million proposed deficiency for fiscal 2025 for a total of $30 million. But overall, you know, the use of the general funds is fairly constrained, and had it not been for the inadvertent reversions, it would have been even less. On page 7, under transfers and reversions, another significant component of the overall budget plan includes the transfer of prior general funds to the general fund to help with the operating budget situation. Roughly about $196 million of proposed reversions in the budget. About $114 million of this comes from the dedicated purpose account, of which only 40 will be replaced. The 2 areas where you're not seeing replacement, one is the new veterans home, 62 million, 63 roughly in the dedicated purpose account remains after the state's already expended or will expend about $7 million for design on that project. But the state has thus far not received federal award for that project, and it is on hold. So the budget proposal would be to transfer that to the general fund as we await possibly, you know, reapplication for this project that would be in Sykesville. And then the DNR critical maintenance program, the budget last year transferred a portion of that from the dedicated purpose account when there was $25 million appropriated in fiscal 2023. And since the Great American Outdoors Act provided a significant amount of funding for DNR for projects on their DNR on their state park grounds, a portion was transferred last year, and the remaining $11 million that remains from the original 25 is being proposed to be transferred this year and not replaced. And then there's about another $82 million of proposed reversions of general funds authorized for a couple projects. You see here that the plan is to fully replace those with GO bond funds. So again, that's a significant component of the overall budget planned by the governor. And page 8 just gives you, at the top of page 8, gives you a perspective on what's left in the dedicated purpose account and what's been spent. Again, about $1.53 billion was in the dedicated purpose account. Most of it's from FY23, some from FY24. About $1.3 billion has been released. $58 million was transferred last year. And again, the proposed transfer of about $114 million this year. This leaves about $68 million still in the dedicated purpose account that I guess could still remain as funds that could be reverted to the general fund and made up with GO bond funds to the extent that room could be made in the capital program to accommodate the transfer of that. But at this point, the proposal leaves that $68 million in the dedicated purpose account for the purposes that you see on the top of page 8. There are a few notable cancellations of projects. In addition to the new veterans home, which I briefly discussed, the budget no longer supports the renovation of the William Donald Schaefer Tower or the Nancy Grasmick building. Both of those were substantial renovation projects planned in the CIP. The administration is choosing to pursue rental options in Baltimore City rather than to expend the funds on these projects. A reevaluation of the cost-benefit analysis of these projects reveals that it'd be more fiscally prudent to seek out rental options rather than to make the state investment in those state assets. And the eventual plan is to divest from those properties at some point once the occupants are moved out and rental arrangements are made, which will take a couple of years to work out. The bottom of the page, there's a little summary of legislative priorities. Again, significant amount of governor's initiatives in the budget this year relative to what was proposed. A portion of that is going to fund items that were pre-authorized by the legislature last year, about 51.5 of the 73 million of legislative priorities are being funded. Appendix 6 on page 33 gives you a summary of the items which were pre-authorized last year, the legislative priorities, that is. It doesn't include all pre-authorizations for things that are being cash flowed, but it gives you a sense of what the governor's budget proposes to fund relative to what was pre-authorized by the legislature last year. Page 9, school construction, just give you a perspective of the last several years compared to fiscal 2026. I think the news here is the budget does meet the $450 million intended authorization level for public school construction. It does this with a combination of GO bond funds, roughly $444 million, plus another $9 million of special funds from the Fiscal Responsibility Fund to get to that $450 million level. And you can see in the orange bar the revenue bonds. These are the built-to-learn bonds, and this reflects the 22 and the 25 reflect the actual amount of issuance that was made that is being applied to the capital side of things, because some of the issuance goes to pay for the cost of issuance. So after all of those costs are absorbed, the orange bar in 22 and 25 reflects the actual. 26 reflects an estimate of what the issuance would be sometime during the fiscal year. But again, on par with the expectations that the legislature set for public school construction at $450 million. Page 10, a little summary of what's going on with the transfer tax. The situation's not much different than it was last year. The revenues are down relative to where they were just a couple years ago. The Board of Revenue Estimates has written those numbers down relative to just the estimate from December of 2023. So it's roughly $220 million of estimated revenues for fiscal 2026, fairly close to 25, but significantly different than what was funded in 2024. But the big news there is also this is the second year in which the programs are having to absorb an underattainment of revenue from what was budgeted. So, for instance, in fiscal 2026, that negative adjustment of $85 million reflects an over budgeting in fiscal 2024 of those revenues. So it's not like the programs aren't going to get the money. They got the money in 2024, and they're not getting it in 2026 to account for the underattainment of those revenues. And the next page gives you a summary of the programs that are impacted, the programs that are funded through Program Open Space over the last couple of years to give you a perspective of the impact on the individual programs. Page 12, a little spotlight on federal funds. I think everyone's very aware of what's happening in Washington. It creates a degree of uncertainty about the federal funds that the state does program in the 5-year CIP. Roughly about $830 million of federal funds over the next 5 years are programmed in the CIP. Much of this is in the Maryland Department of the Environment and Department of Housing and Community Development. There's a bullet list of items on page 13 which kind of lay out the different sources of funds for each of these so you can get a perspective of where those funds are coming from. There's still a rather sizable portion that's expected to go to MDE through the IIJ program at the federal level. There's obviously been some talk of whether or not all of these will be released. So, that's something to think about. And Appendix 7 gives you a summary of what the flow of federal funds through IIJA for the MDE programs to give you some perspective. Page 14, a little summary of facility renewal. I think all of you know that the state, has a fairly sizable backlog of facility renewal program. I think it's estimated at $268 million. However, if you read through the text, you'll see that really that number's going to end up being quite higher once DGS finally takes the work of the building assessment unit, which was reconstituted a couple years ago. The initial assessment by that unit is that the backlog is really more close to about $785 million. okay? But the budget does include an enhancement to the facility renewal program over the next 5 years, $375 million for the next 5 years compared to $130 million in last year's CIP for the 5-year stretch. Now, hopefully this will help Department of General Services work down on the backlog. They have made some enhancements to the program over the last few years. The aforementioned building assessment unit that goes out to assess our facilities. They have improved their encumbrance accounting over the last couple of years, getting it up in excess of $40 million, which is useful because they've had a significant problem encumbering funds, which is the reason why their authorization levels have been lower. And a significant portion of this is earmarked to address climate solutions now, and there's a bullet on that. Next couple pages just show what the backlog looks like this year as compared to the last several years. And on page 16, a summary of where most of that backlog exists. And it exists in the places you might expect. The agencies that have the largest asset inventory, this excludes USM, this is just DGS facilities. So you can see where the backlog is. Page 17 through, I think, 20 is a summary of what's happening with facility renewal at USM and with all our other higher education components of the budget. You can see from the chart on page 17 what the University System of Maryland is putting in their operating budget, including ARBs. That's the yellow and the purple bar. And then the green bar is meant to reflect the impact of the 5-year CIP. As we replace buildings, that takes items off of the facility renewal list. So they count that as facility renewal spending as we replace buildings. On page 18, this puts this into perspective with respect to the backlog and the assessed value and the facility condition index. So a low facility condition index is good, high is bad. They're all still pretty high, relatively speaking, for system. The blue bar shows what the current facility condition index is for each of the institutions. The red bar shows whether they've improved it or not. If they're under zero, if it goes under zero, that means they've improved their facility condition index. If it's above, that means the facility condition index is getting worse. And what that means is that assets are being evaluated every year, and the deferred maintenance on those assets is exceeding what is actually being put in to those assets on a replacement value. And then page 19 is actually an assessment of replacement value. You can see roughly about 3% replacement value in actual 24. And I think they'll probably be at around 3% in 25 and 26 when those close out and additional spending. Usually system brings in additional spending after the budget is passed. However, with the reductions that they're going to take this year, it is quite likely that in 26 they may not add additional funds. That may be areas where they actually cut from their budget, which they've done in the past when things need to be streamlined. 3% maybe sounds good, but really an industry standard for this would be closer to 5 or 6%. Page 20 is just a summary of what we're doing besides University System of Maryland for facility renewal programs at our other higher education institutions. And then on page 21, just a summary of transportation. You can see here the state has provided a significant amount of funding over the last couple of years to support transportation initiatives outside of the traditional MDOT program. You can see this as some earmarks in both the DPA and the Rainy Day Fund in 24 and 25. The FBI headquarters building, which the state has already appropriated $200 million, is a transportation facility as well. And I think the take here is with the revenue packages on tap potentially for MDOT, that maybe in the out years the state should consider funding the WMATA grant out of MDOT instead of with general funds, which is what's proposed in fiscal 27 through 2030 to help with the overall budget situation over the next couple of years. There's a variety of appendices for your viewing pleasure. Some nighttime reading puts you to sleep pretty quick. And with that, take questions. Thank you.
Matt, thank you for that great analysis. I know you put a lot of work into it. I'm going to be up till 3 a.m. just reading everything else that you wrote.
If you stayed awake till 3 a.m. reading this, I'd be surprised.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any questions for Matt? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Oh, oh,
Oh,
oh, oh.
yes, sir.
We got Chairman.
With regard to the bond premiums, I'm going to assume that they just flow into the whole picture. Were they identified for any particular things?
No, other than a 5 million deficiency, which is being proposed to help fund replacement of funds that were inadvertently reverted in last year for the University of Maryland Medical System. The way we do bond premiums now is they're just part of the capital budget, and that gives the treasurer maximum flexibility, so we spend it as quickly as possible, because that is one of the requirements. So there isn't any identification of project.
Matt, anyone else from your team? You're good? Good.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. So, colleagues, what I want to do is just kind of walk through the rest of the agencies. So I know that there's an impending snow, so just wanted, I know we need to take Department of Planning next because they need to be over at the House. So I see, Matt, I see you over there. Secretary Addix, I see you over there. Is there anyone from Department of Information Technology in person? Okay. I heard they were going to be virtual. I just wanted to, so what we're going to do is we're going to go Department of Planning. Secretary Addix will go with you next. Maryland Independent College is next, and then we'll take Department of Information Technology just based on the people that are here in person. Thank you for flexibility with that. So we're going to go to Elizabeth Wabel, who's going to present the capital budget on Department of Planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just jump right in. MDP has 3 grant and loan programs in the capital budget this year. I'll also provide an update on ongoing and planned state-owned projects at the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum. The 3 grant and loan programs collectively received $6 million in GO bond funding and $150,000 in special funds, as you'll see in the chart on the first page. The African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program receives $5 million in bonds. The Maryland Historical Trust, or MHT Capital Grant Program, receives $1 million in bonds. And the MHT Loan Program receives $150,000 in special funds that are available for loan repayments. In previous years, DLS has also included the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit in our capital analysis, but this year we've got that in the operating analysis to align with DBM. The MHT Loan Program is described on page 5. That received $300,000 in the fiscal 25 budget. It's been issuing 1 loan or less per year, and it brings in about $170,000 annually in loan repayments. And then about $54,000 of that goes to MHT operational costs. 2023 law allows MHT to transfer funds to a qualifying nonprofit organization. And so far, Preservation Maryland has applied for and received one $300,000 transfer from the loan program in fiscal 24. The estimated annual revenues to the program will only support up to $150,000 in annual encumbrances through fiscal 2028, and that'll go as low as $120,000 by fiscal 29, at which point the fund would require recapitalization. And DBM has recommended not including GO bonds for recapitalization in the CIP until the impact of this new law regarding transfers is known. The MHT Capital Grant Program is on page 6. The fiscal 26 budget includes $1 million in GO bond funding, which is an increase from $600,000 in fiscal 2025. Exhibit 1 shows that the program has consistently received more applications for assistance than it has been able to fund, so there is certainly demand for this program. The African American Heritage Preservation Program on page 7. This is administered by MHT in conjunction with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. There have been some recent changes to this program. 2022 legislation increased the mandated funding for the program from $1 million to $5 million, beginning with fiscal 2024, and eliminated a funding match requirement. It also increased the maximum per project cap on funding. And Exhibit 2 shows a large increase in the number of applications received once those changes went into effect. And DLS has asked MDP to comment on how these program changes are going and whether any additional changes are needed. The capital budget bill also includes amendments to extend the authorization for GO bonds that were previously authorized. So those bonds were authorized in fiscal 2017 and 28 for the MHT Capital Grant Program, in 2011 through 2018 for the African American Heritage Preservation Program, and in 2015 and 2016 for the St. Leonard's Creek Shoreline Program at JPPM. And this authorization would just allow NHT 2 more years to expend those funds. Regarding the grant programs, DLS has asked MDP to comment on strategies that it uses to ensure the timely execution of projects and expenditure of grant funds. DLS's recommendation is to approve all of the authorizations and amendments to prior authorizations for MDP and to concur with the governor's allowance of special funds. And those recommendations are on page 3. I'll just briefly provide an update on projects at the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum in Calvert County. These don't receive any funding in this year's budget, although the St. Leonard's Creek Shoreline Project, which I mentioned earlier, is doing some erosion control measures, a pier, and boardwalks. A plan for that project is currently under review with the Department of the Environment. The Asbury House renovation is no longer in the CIP. This was programmed to receive $550,000 in fiscal 2027 to renovate the house, which is on park-owned property, so that it can be rented out. The Patterson House previously received capital funding, and that project has been completed and is expected to open to the public in May of this year. And then finally, the Maryland Archaeology Conservation Lab renovation and expansion is still ongoing. It's about 60% complete and isn't expected to need any more funds. That concludes my analysis, and I can take any questions you have.
Well, thank you very much for that great analysis. Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, I know we have the agency on the line here. We appreciate you coming in, and please start whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair Zucker and Vice Chair McCray in the committee, and thank you for allowing a hybrid virtual option so we can all travel safely. We actually have Director Elizabeth Hughes of the MHT in the room who will be there to maybe more effectively respond to any questions you may have. For the record, obviously Secretary Rebecca Flora with MDP are here, and then we also have our Deputy Secretary Kristen Fleckenstein. But our response, I think, is fairly straightforward to the 2 key question areas, one being the capital grant program and the other around the African American Heritage Preservation Program. And so I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible and just open it for questions that Director Hughes will respond to there in the room.
Any questions for the department? The only question I had, it was on the last page of the, I guess second to last page on the analysis. It's page 9. So it's the Historic Preservation Grant and Loan Funded Projects. Are those still planning to be expended? The $604,000?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions for the department? Okay. Thank you very much. Oh,
Thank you for your time.
Vice Chair McCray. We got one more
Okay.
question. Vice Chair.
Hi.
Madam Director, first, just thank you. I worked with you a number of times over the years. I just want to make sure that I'm clear and understand the African American Heritage Preservation Program. So in Exhibit 2, page 7, it talks about requested funds awarded. And when I read page 2 itself, it talked about some of the grants that haven't been extended and needed extensions and things of that nature. Can you elaborate in reference to this specific program? Like when you talk about those extensions, is it prevalent in this program or no, you guys are?
Really, with both the capital historic preservation grants and the African American Heritage Preservation grants, these are, complex capital projects with historic buildings that have a lot of needs. And oftentimes the applicants are nonprofit organizations that have limited capacity, no paid staff.
Yep.
So it's a lot of hand-holding and technical assistance that is needed to bring them to the finish line. So particularly with the capital grants that were mentioned, we have about 6 projects that date between fiscal year 18 and 21. Some of those were caught up in sort of COVID-related issues that has delayed them. But I would say just generally with these programs, when you're working with nonprofit organizations, you just need to spend a lot of time helping them, get the projects completed. So that's really what will cause oftentimes delays, as well as finding practitioners, contractors who can do this work, who are willing to do this work, and the materials.
So, Director Hughes, I just want to lean in and say I always value your partnership. Myself and at the time Delegate Henson, now Senator Henson, had worked on the bill to up that from 1 to 5. And I just can you follow up with me with at least a list so that I at least have an understanding of like, who's the folks that's not getting out the door in reference to application and value?
Sure,
Yes, ma'am.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Too.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, thank you. I don't know if any other member of your team needs to say anything. Otherwise, I don't see any other questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Everyone take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a couple of public testimony. So if you're here, Jeffrey Kahn and Rod Caulfield, you here? Come on
No,
up.
they were actually members of our team that
Great.
did not, we felt that we had it covered with the team that's here.
No problem. And no, I think we're good. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We just want to make
Take
sure
care.
we covered all our bases.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Secretary, I gave so much praise to Director Hughes.
Yeah, everybody's very thankful. Yeah. So be safe. We're now turned to the Department of Agriculture. Come on, Andrew. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of Agriculture's fiscal 2026 capital budget analysis. On page 1, you see there, Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Program funding goes down between fiscal 2025 and 2026 due to the reduction in the transfer tax available. That's information was provided to you by Mr. Klein a little bit earlier. The out years do reflect the return of the transfer tax revenue estimates kind of an increasing level. There is no funding in the budget for the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program in fiscal 2026 due to the availability of fund balance. That concludes my presentation. DLS recommends concurring with the allowance.
Andrew, it feels like you've been doing this for a little bit. I don't know. Thank you. No, thank you for all the work you put into it. Mr. Secretary, come on up, and I have a very important question to ask you. Have you been to the distillery at Lone Oak yet? Feel free to add that at the end of your testimony.
Mr. Chair, I'll go on the record of saying I have not yet been to the distillery at Lone Oak, but I did try all of their products at the Taste of Maryland Agriculture dinner last Thursday evening. And really, really good stuff. So congrats. Your district and your nearby district continue to be leaders. So thank you for that. For the record, Kevin Addix, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Agriculture, here to concur with Mr. Gray's concurrence of our budget as listed. There are 2 items that we receive capital funding for. As was noted, one of them is not receiving new funds, but we are comfortable in the fact that we have residual fund revenue left over from projects that didn't fly, and there were reversions, and we do have some money left over, and we think that we can survive in the Maryland Ag Cost Share Program, which is a critically important program because that's what gets our conservation practices to save the bay, save soil health, et cetera, actually on the ground. So we have about $10 million that will be used up. And then the next one is the Maryland Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, which is our vehicle for preserving viable agricultural land in the state. Just some stats to show you how incredible this is. As of January 1st, we have preserved this number of easements, 2,804 easements, accounting for over 376,000 acres of viable farmland. So that is keeping it in the family, keeping that active and hopefully profitable. We have just spent the billionth dollar, and that includes state, federal, and local money, to preserve agricultural land, so that it shows that the state has been investing in agricultural preservation. And these programs are both very important going forward. I'll put the asterisk on that we look forward to funding for the MAX program going forward. And in the meantime, we're happy to continue preserving agricultural land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Heather, good to see you. Any questions for the Secretary or his panel? Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
I don't think I missed anyone from the Department of Ag. We'll now go to the Maryland Independent Colleges and Universities. Victoria Martinez will come up first. And then, Matt, you can bring up your team afterward. Perfect. Good to see you, Ms. Martinez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for MICUA. MICUA administers the Private Higher Education Facilities Grant Program, which provides funding to Maryland's private colleges and universities to assist with costs of constructing and renovating academic facilities. As shown on the cover page, the capital budget provides $8 million in GO bonds for the program in 2026. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the 3 projects selected for funding, including $3.36 million for a music and performing arts wing at Stevenson University, $2.48 million for the Hodson Science expansion at Hood College, and $2.16 million for the Merritt Hall Health Science renovation at McDaniel College. Pages 5 and 6 have additional details on each of the 3 programs, and pages 6 and 7 provides an update on the status of projects with unexpended funds. And I'll end with DLS's recommendations, which are to approve all authorizations for MICUA. So that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that great analysis. Any questions? Ms. Martinez? Okay, thank you very much. And if you want to come up with the presidents. And sir, you and your team can start whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Zucker, members of the subcommittee. Thankful for the opportunity to present MICUA's capital program today. I'm Matt Power, President of MICUA. We'd like to thank Ms. Martinez for excellent analysis, as always. We're grateful to the Governor and the General Assembly for our longstanding partnership to create and revitalize academic spaces on all of our campuses and drive private investment throughout the state of Maryland. The partnership we've created over the years helps our presidents increase private donations, because when donors know that projects have the commitment of the state of Maryland, they know the projects are actually going to come to fruition and that their dollars are dollars well spent. The state funding affords these projects, which will result in $23 million in private investment in the state of Maryland across these 3 projects, supporting 250 construction jobs and allowing us to address workforce needs, attract new students, and future taxpayers. We're appreciative, obviously, for the $8 million of funding provided by the governor in the capital budget, but we are seeking an additional $3.96 beyond what was included in the governor's budget. Historically, the General Assembly has often helped our projects above the governor's allowance, because you know how important these dollars are and how much this private investment is to our schools and how it helps leverage additional money for the small public investment that is afforded our institutions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to President Ricker from Hood College for her to discuss the projects at Hood.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for your time. First of all, I want to thank you for your historical support of MICUA institutions on behalf of myself and my colleagues. This request on behalf of Hood College is in support of a renovation of our Hodson Science and Technology Complex, which is a facility of 4 interconnected buildings. The 4th of these buildings is what we call the Annex. The Annex was built in 1927 and is the former central heating plant and laundry facility for the college. But because it's connected to a very robust and vital science and technology center, we're seeking through this capital grant an investment to renovate that space and outfit it with laboratory and classroom spaces so that we can expand our support for our STEM majors and programs at Hood. These programs not only support our fastest growing and most robust undergraduate and graduate programs, but they also support our health science programs that collectively represent 3 of our top 5 majors and programs at the institution. Just for context, we know that the vast majority of our undergraduate students come from the state of Maryland. We know that 78% of them stay in Maryland and are the scientists and the innovators and technologists and small business owners that build our robust economy. So we're grateful for an investment in this space, because not only does it align with Hood's mission, but also the Moore-Miller administration's strategic economic goals. In addition, this space houses Hood's newly established Biomedical Research and Training Center, which is recognized as a hub in Maryland Tech Council's BioHub initiative, which is intended to allow employees to be upskilled and reskilled in the fields of biomanufacturing and biotechnology. again, I thank you for your time and for your consideration of this request. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Elliot Hirschman from Stevenson University. Thank you for your support. Stevenson is requesting a capital grant to support the construction of a 12,000 square foot addition to our Black Box Theater. Just a little bit about the facility. This wing will include our music performance stage and classrooms. It will house fine arts courses that every Stevenson student will take, our growing music minor and co-curricular music and performance programs. Why is this so important to Stevenson? Project addresses several critical needs. Currently, our students must travel 30 minutes between our Owings Mills and Green Spring campus to participate in music and performance programs. That obviously discourages students from participating in the programs, and it also hinders the university's ability to recruit students who are interested in these programs. The addition of a music performance stage will address these challenges, providing opportunities for our programs and our students to develop further. I do want to highlight that integrating the music performance stage with our Black Box Theater will create significant cost savings because the facilities can share a loading dock, a lobby, food service, and a scene shop. And finally, the current project will also allow Stevenson to host local art groups and provide music education in our Owings Mills community. As Maryland's third largest independent institution, Stevenson is dedicated to supporting the career aspirations of our students. And for over 10 years straight, over 90% of our graduates have been employed or in graduate school within 6 months of graduation, making significant contributions to Maryland's economic prosperity. Thank you for your continuing support.
Hello, I'm Flavius Lilly from McDaniel College. First of all, thanks to the General Assembly for investing in Maryland's independent colleges and universities. McDaniel is requesting $2.96 million capital grant for fiscal year 26, supporting a nearly $6 million renovation project in Merritt Hall. This project will house new academic programs that meet Maryland's workforce demands in neuroscience. In addition, new programs in early childhood education, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology, programs that are slated to grow by 19 to 41% over the next decade. We're very aware of Maryland's workforce needs and the economic impact of this investment. McDaniel has a long-standing commitment to teacher preparation and will help expand access to pre-K education, one of the goals outlined in the blueprint for Maryland's future. And new programs in occupational therapy and speech-language pathology align with the Moore-Miller administration's state plan, which calls for scaling up the healthcare workforce training. As a direct result of the state's investment, once these programs are fully operational, approximately 100 graduates per year will enter Maryland's workforce in high-demand fields. Additionally, since 73% of our students at McDaniel are Maryland residents, these programs will continue the goal of keeping Maryland residents right here in Maryland, reducing the number leaving the state to obtain bachelor's and advanced training in other states. McDaniel's Merritt Hall was originally constructed in 2003 and has not received an upgrade in 21 years. The renovation is essential to house these programs and will create new classrooms, simulation labs, research laboratories, and faculty offices in a cost-effective and strategic way. In closing, investing in McDaniel's Merritt Hall renovation is a direct investment into Maryland's future workforce. We're grateful for your consideration and urge you to support the capital grant request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time coming from all areas of the state. Any questions for the panel? Senator Hellman.
No questions, Mr. Chairman, but just wanted to welcome my constituent and Stevenson University.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Really appreciate your being here and telling us about the project. Very exciting. Thank you.
Matt, I think I know the answer to this. I just want to make sure, just for us being able to track this. So just for Hood College, for example, right now the allocation that you're currently in the governor's budget is about 2.5, and you're looking for another 1.5. Is that correct?
We're looking for 3 for Hood, 5 for Stevenson, and 2.96. Not 3, 2.96 for McDaniel.
But you'd take 3.
Take
For a total of 11.96.
Right.
And we're at 8 now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other
Thank you
questions?
so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Committee will now turn our attention to the Department of Information Technology. Turn to Ms. Rye, the analyst, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'll be presenting the fiscal 26 capital budget analysis for the Department of Information Technology, or DOIT. DOIT's fiscal 26 capital budget includes one project, Maryland First Responders Interoperable Radio System Team, or MD First. On page 1, the capital budget request for fiscal 26 for MD First is $14.9 million in general obligation bonds. On page 2, we have highlighted 4 key observations. The first to address the current contract with Motorola that is expiring in November 2025. DOIT is planning to exercise a no-cost extension for 1 to 2 years to continue project work on the radio sites that received funding in fiscal 24 and 25. However, this no-cost extension does not cover the system maintenance support component of the contract. The second observation notes that DOIT is currently reviewing a sole source 6-year maintenance contract with Motorola that incorporates the 2 remaining RFP functional areas that were not Motorola proprietary, and expects to send this proposed contract to the Board of Public Works for approval in spring of this year. We request DOIT to brief the committees on the department's contingency plan if the approval process for the system maintenance contract component extends beyond November 25, and if this contingency plan would cost additional amount to the state. The third observation notes that replacement costs for dispatch consoles and base station radios that are reaching end of life are not included in the fiscal 26 budget. DOIT is working with the Department of Budget and Management to determine the replacement cost for these components. At the top of page 3, the fourth observation notes that MD First has about $35 million in unexpended balances from the state appropriation made in fiscal 22 and earlier. We request DOIT to comment on the anticipated timeline for expending these older state funds. At the bottom of page 3 is DLS's recommendation to approve $14.9 million in GEO bonds to support the 4 sub-programs, which we will discuss in a minute. First, Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows the 5 phases in which the original infrastructure build of MD First was completed, the latest being Phase 5 in April 23. At the top of page 6, DOIT notes that site installation and implementations are underway for the T1 to Ethernet technology conversion, and that the project is on track to be completed in June of this year. DOIT also expects closeout activities to be completed by November 2025 when the current Motorola contract expires. Now, moving on to our discussion on the 4 subprograms on page 6, DOIT has identified 4 subprograms that aim to address deficiencies in the existing emergency communication system. Exhibit 2 on page 7 shows the capital cost for the 4 subprograms from fiscal 24 to 30. These 4 subprograms include additional radio sites, which are the blue bars, an expansion of fiber optic to replace microwave transmissions, the red bars, control sites, yellow bars, and installation of in-building antenna systems, the green bars. The total estimated cost for the entire project is $97.8 million through fiscal 30. Fiscal 29 and 30 costs for control sites are approximately $1.5 million higher each year than previous years because it includes 2 additional control sites. Exhibit 3 on page 8 shows a list of planned radio sites from fiscal 24 to 30. Sites identified in fiscal 24 and 25 already have approved funding. Sites from fiscal 27 to 29 may be subject to change due to further site investigation activities, and no radio sites are planned for fiscal 2030. On page 9 is the second subprogram, fiber optic expansion. This program receives $6 million in fiscal 26 for 3 fiber projects and a total of $17.3 million from fiscal 27 through fiscal 30 for 12 projects. At the bottom of page 9 is the third subprogram, in-building antennas. This subprogram receives $1.1 million in fiscal 26 for 2 antennas installations. Page 10 highlights the 4th subprogram, geo-redundant control sites. In fiscal 26, DOIT plans to use $1.2 million for the Garrett County simulcast cell. This subprogram receives $2.6 million in fiscal 27 and 28 to add 1 control site each year and $5.7 million to add 2 control sites in fiscal 29 and 30. Page 11 highlights DoIT's out-year fiber optimization program that transitions the current last-mile leased circuits to the state-owned network Maryland Fiber. This project is expected to start beginning fiscal 2030 with an estimated cost of approximately $3.2 million in fiscal 30. Appendix 1 on page 12 shows the operating budget impact of this project. Fiscal 26 allowance includes $19.9 million in operating costs, of which 87.9% accounts for contracts. This is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that fantastic analysis and great work. Any questions? Okay. We'll turn to Department of Information Technology. Madam Secretary, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Melissa Lehman, Acting Secretary for the Maryland Department of Information Technology. I am joined here today with Eric Bathurst, our Chief Technology Officer of Infrastructure, as well as Norman Farley, our Senior Director of Public Safety Communications. I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to provide the testimony to the committee, and also thank you for the opportunity for hybrid. Looks like, at least on the Eastern Shore, it's just started snowing, so perfect timing. We also want to thank Yashodhara Rai, our Department of Legislative Services Analyst, for her efforts and her support. The Department of Information Technology has one capital project to review, and that is the Maryland First statewide interoperable public safety communication system. Maryland First is a mission-critical public safety radio system that supports the governor's goal of creating a safer Maryland. It does so by providing public safety users with a reliable, secure, statewide, and interoperable communication system. It is a proven lifeline for Maryland public safety users and is the go-to interoperability communication system for Maryland's first responder community. From day-to-day operations to the call by the MDTA dispatchers to close the Francis Scott Key Bridge, Maryland First has proved its mettle. The system now supports over 122,000 users and averages over 3.2 million transmissions per month. A major success in 2024 was the addition of a new radio site located in downtown Washington, D.C. This site was funded through a grant provided by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and the goal of this D.C. radio site was to support Maryland First users and provide interoperability and redundancy during national special security events and any emergencies within the National Capital Region. This site went live on November 4th and immediately provided support for Maryland first responders during the November presidential election, the January 6th certification of electoral votes, President Jimmy Carter's funeral, the presidential inauguration, and the recent DC plane crash tragedy. Our FY 2026 capital budget request is for $14.9 million. This request includes funding for the ongoing work associated with the Coverage Improvement Program and the Resiliency Improvement Program. We support the budget analysis presented and its recommendation. We thank the committee for its consideration, and we stand by to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Secretary, and I thank you and your team. Are there any questions for the department? Okay, Madam Secretary, I don't see any other questions. Anything else that your team wants to add, or are you good to go?
I think we're good to go. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. Colleagues, unless I'm missing anyone, I'll look at staff. That concludes today's capital budget hearings. Be safe out there. Have a great day.